I was just pulled over by a police officer and something felt really wrong. He asked me strange questions, like if I lived alone, what time I usually get home from work. I don't know, he just didn't seem right. Can you describe the officer, ma'am? That's the thing, I didn't catch his badge number. He never gave me one. He smiled at me when he let me go. It wasn't a normal smile. Ma'am, where are you right now? I'm driving. I'm almost home. I just needed to report this because something is not right with that guy. I can feel it. She was right. He wasn't a cop. And she was lucky to be alive. Is your host. And this is where we dive deep into the cases that don't get talked about enough. Before we get into tonight's story, do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a like on this video. It really helps the channel grow and it lets me keep bringing you these investigations every single week. Now, tonight, we're going to Colorado, a rural county. Empty roads that stretch for miles through the mountains. The kind of place where your cell phone loses signal and the nearest neighbor is 20 minutes away. And this is the story of a man who figured out the perfect way to hunt. His name was Marcus Weber. And for almost 2 years, he played a role that gave him unlimited access to vulnerable people. A role that made them trust him instantly. A role that let him ask any question he wanted without suspicion. He pretended to be a cop. This case has never been covered like this. I've spent weeks going through the reports, the interviews, the court documents, and I need you to stay until the end, because what they found inside his house changed everything. What started as fake traffic stops turned into something much darker, something that was only 72 hours away from becoming a nightmare no one could undo. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Garrett County, Colorado. If you've never heard of it, that's the point. It's one of those places that only exists on maps and in the lives of the few thousand people who call it home. We're talking about a stretch of land tucked between mountain ranges, where the roads twist and climb through pine forests so thick you can't see 50 feet past the tree line. Out here, your nearest grocery store is a 40-minute drive. Your nearest hospital is over an hour, and your cell phone? Forget about it. Once you pass mile marker 17 on Route 84, you're on your own. No signal, no service. Just you, your car, and whatever is waiting around the next bend. This is the kind of place where people move to disappear, where families have lived for generations without ever needing the outside world, and where, if something goes wrong, nobody is coming to save you. The main artery through Garrett County is a 2-lane road that locals call the Ridge Line. It connects the small town of Ridley to the even smaller town of Pearson, about 35 miles of asphalt that hugs the mountainside like a scar. During the day, it's actually beautiful. You can see for miles across the valley, watch the hawks circle overhead, feel like you're the only person left on Earth. But at night, the ridgeline transforms into something else entirely. The trees close in. The curves come faster than your headlights can track. And there's this darkness out here that people from the city never understand. It's not just the absence of light. It's the absence of everything. No street lamps. No house lights in the distance. No glow from a nearby town. Just black. Pure, suffocating black. November 14th, 2019. It was a Thursday night, just past 11:30. Sarah Mellinger was driving home after finishing a 12-hour shift at Ridley General Hospital, where she worked as an A nurse. 28 years old, lived alone in a small house about 6 miles outside of town. She'd made this drive hundreds of times. Knew every curve, every pothole, every spot where deer like to cross. She had her music playing low, her window cracked to keep herself awake. The coffee she grabbed from the nurse's station had gone cold an hour ago. All she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed before her next shift started in 14 hours. She had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, her life was about to change forever. She first noticed the headlights about 2 miles past the Ridley town limits. A car had pulled out from one of the Forest Service roads and settled in behind her, keeping a steady distance. Sarah didn't think much of it at first. Other people lived out this way. Other people drove home late at night, but after a mile or so, she noticed the car was getting closer, then closer still, and then, without warning, the red and blue lights started flashing. Sarah's stomach dropped the way it does when you see those lights in your mirror, even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. She checked her speedometer. 52 in a 55 zone. She wasn't speeding. Her registration was current. Her taillights worked. But she pulled over anyway because that's what you do. That's what we're all taught to do. She stopped on a small gravel turnout, the kind that exists every few miles along the ridgeline for slow vehicles to let others pass. The patrol car pulled up behind her, its lights still spinning, painting the trees red and blue in alternating flashes. Sarah rolled down her window and waited, and waited. For almost 2 full minutes, nothing happened. The officer just sat in his car, and Sarah sat in hers, watching through the mirror. When he finally approached, he did it slowly. Too slowly. He walked along the driver's side of her car with his flashlight beam pointed at the ground, not at her window like she'd expected. And when he reached her door, he didn't stand back like cops usually do. He leaned in, close enough that she could smell cigarettes and something else, something sour, on his breath. He asked for her license and registration, which was normal. Sarah handed them over. But then the questions started, and nothing about them felt normal at all. Do you live alone? What time did your shift end tonight? Is anyone expecting you at home? How often do you work the night shift? Do you have a security system? Sarah answered, because she was nervous, and when you're nervous, you talk. But with each question, something in the back of her mind started screaming. This isn't right. This isn't how traffic stops work. The officer never told her why he'd pulled her over. He never mentioned a broken taillight or a failure to signal or anything at all. He just asked his questions, wrote something in a small notebook, and then handed back her documents with a smile. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Drive safe now, he said. And then he walked back to his car, killed the flashing lights, and pulled a U-turn back toward Ridley. Sarah sat there in the dark for 5 minutes, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip the steering wheel. She thought about calling someone, but there was no signal. She thought about driving to the police station to report what happened, but she didn't even know what to report. A cop asked me weird questions. They'd laugh at her. They'd tell her she was being paranoid, that she'd watched too many crime documentaries. So she drove home, locked every door, checked every window, and didn't sleep at all that night. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself it was nothing. She was wrong. Now, if this was the only report, this story wouldn't exist. A strange traffic stop, a nervous nurse, a cop with bad social skills. It could have been nothing. It probably should have been nothing. But here's what Sarah didn't know that night, sitting in her locked house, jumping at every sound outside her window. She wasn't the first person to be pulled over by that officer on that stretch of road. There had been others before her. People who'd had the same experience, asked the same strange questions, felt the same cold dread in their stomachs. And there would be many more after her, because the man who pulled Sarah over that night wasn't collecting traffic violations. He was collecting something else entirely. And Sarah Mellinger had just become a name in his notebook. She definitely wasn't the last. So who was the man behind those flashing lights? To understand what happened in Garrett County, we need to go back. Back before the fake badge, before the traffic stops, before any of this started. We need to understand Marcus Weber. And I'll be honest with you, when I first started researching this case, I expected to find the usual story. Troubled childhood, violent outbursts, a trail of warning signs that everyone ignored. But Marcus wasn't like that. At least, not on the surface. He grew up in Aurora, Colorado, about 4 hours east of Garrett County. Middle-class family. Parents still married. One younger sister. He graduated high school with decent grades, played junior varsity football, worked part-time at a hardware store. Nothing in his early life screams future predator. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. After high school, Marcus drifted. He tried community college for a semester but dropped out. Worked a series of jobs that never lasted more than a year. Warehouse worker, delivery driver, overnight stocker at a big box store. His employment records show a pattern that only becomes clear in hindsight. Every job he left or was asked to leave involved some kind of conflict with authority. He argued with supervisors. He refused to follow protocols he thought were stupid. He had what one former manager described as a problem with being told what to do by people he didn't respect. But in 2015, Marcus found something that seemed to fit. He got hired as a security guard for a private company that contracted with office buildings and shopping centers in the Denver metro area. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had a uniform and a badge and authority. For 3 years, Marcus worked security, and by all accounts, he was good at it. Too good, actually. He took the job more seriously than anyone else on the team. He memorized the employee handbook. He studied use of force guidelines even though his position never required them. He practiced handcuffing techniques at home. He collected police equipment catalogs the way other people collect baseball cards. His coworkers thought he was just enthusiastic, maybe a little intense, but harmless. His supervisors appreciated his dedication, but there was something else going on beneath the surface. Marcus wasn't just doing a job. He was rehearsing for something. He was learning how to wear authority like a costume, how to make people comply with just a look, just a tone of voice, how to ask questions that people felt obligated to answer. In 2018, it all fell apart. Marcus was working a night shift at a corporate office building when he detained a cleaning crew employee for what he called suspicious behavior. The employee had simply forgotten his ID badge at home. Standard protocol was to call a supervisor and verify employment. Instead, Marcus held the man in a back room for nearly 2 hours, questioning him about his immigration status, his family, where he lived, whether anyone knew he was working tonight. When the employee's supervisor finally arrived and demanded to know what was happening, Marcus refused to release him. It took 2 police officers to end the situation. The employee filed a complaint. Marcus was fired immediately. But here's what matters. During the internal investigation, they searched his locker. Inside, they found a notebook filled with names, descriptions, and personal details of people who worked in the building. People Marcus had been watching, cataloging. The company wanted to press charges, but their lawyers advised against it. Bad publicity. So they let him go with a warning, and Marcus Weber walked out the door with everything he'd learned and a burning need to prove that he deserved the authority everyone kept taking away from him. It took Marcus less than 6 months to build his new identity. He started with the car, found a 2008 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor at a government surplus auction. These cars are sold to the public all the time, usually to taxi companies or people who just want a reliable used vehicle. But Marcus had other plans. He spent weeks in his garage, slowly transforming it back into what it used to be. He installed a light bar he bought online, the kind that looks exactly like what you'd see on a real patrol car. He added a spotlight on the driver's side mirror. He put a push bumper on the front. He tinted the windows dark enough that you couldn't see inside. From 20 feet away in the dark, you would never know the difference. Your brain would see the silhouette, see the lights, and it would tell you one thing: cop. That's all Marcus needed. The uniform came next. And this is where Marcus showed just how methodical he really was. He didn't buy a cheap costume from a Halloween store. He built an authentic uniform piece by piece. Duty belt from a law enforcement supply website. Handcuffs, real ones, from the same site. A flashlight identical to what Garrett County deputies actually carried. He even had a badge. Not a real one, but close enough that nobody would question it in the dark. Through a car window, while they were nervous and trying to remember if they'd been speeding. He practiced wearing it in front of a mirror, practiced his approach, practiced the way he held his flashlight, the way he stood, the way he spoke. He watched hundreds of hours of body camera footage online, studying how real officers conducted traffic stops. He wasn't playing dress-up. He was becoming something. Marcus chose Garrett County for a reason. He'd driven through it once on a camping trip years earlier and remembered how isolated it felt. How the roads twisted through the mountains with no witnesses. How cell service disappeared the moment you left town. He rented a small cabin about 15 miles outside of Ridley, paying cash, using a fake name. And then he started hunting. Always at night. Always on the ridgeline or one of the other rural routes. He targeted people driving alone, preferably women, preferably coming from the direction of town late at night, which suggested they were returning from work. He never pulled anyone over near houses or intersections. He waited for the empty stretches. The places where screaming wouldn't matter, where running would only get you lost in the woods. He had a type, and he had a method, and he had all the time in the world. Here's what's terrifying, and I need you to really sit with this. Marcus wasn't stupid. He studied. He practiced. He knew exactly how a real traffic stop looks. That's what made him invisible. When he pulled someone over, they didn't see a predator. They saw a uniform. They saw a badge. They saw flashing lights that triggered every instinct we've been taught since childhood. Comply. Be polite. Answer questions. Don't make the officer angry. We trust that uniform more than we trust our own gut feelings, and Marcus knew it. He was counting on it. Every single time those red and blue lights appeared in someone's rearview mirror, he was betting his freedom on one simple truth about human nature. We don't question authority. We obey it. And that obedience was going to cost people more than they could possibly imagine. Sarah Mellinger wasn't the first. That's the thing that haunts me about this case. By the time she was pulled over on that cold November night, Marcus Weber had already been operating in Garrett County for nearly 4 months. 4 months of fake traffic stops. 4 months of strange questions. 4 months of people driving home with that sick feeling in their stomachs, telling themselves they were being paranoid. The first documented incident happened in late July of 2019. A man named David Chun, 42 years old, was driving home from a poker night at his friend's cabin when he saw those flashing lights behind him. Same routine. Same weird questions. Same officer who never explained why he'd been pulled over in the first place. David thought about reporting it, but he talked himself out of it. What was he going to say? A cop was too friendly? The second report came 3 weeks later. A woman named Patricia Vance, 56, retired schoolteacher. She was coming back from visiting her sister in Pearson when it happened. The officer who stopped her asked if she lived alone, how long she'd lived in the area, whether she had any family nearby. Patricia had been a teacher for 30 years. She knew when something wasn't right, so she actually did report it. She drove straight to the Garrett County Sheriff's Office and told the deputy at the front desk exactly what happened. The deputy took notes, nodded sympathetically, and promised someone would look into it. They never did. When investigators finally pulled the records after Marcus was arrested, they found Patricia's complaint sitting in a file marked low priority, no action required. Nobody had even read it. September brought 2 more incidents, both within the same week. The first was a young couple, Brian and Michelle Torres, driving back from a wedding in Denver. They remembered the officer being particularly interested in Michelle, asking her questions directly while barely acknowledging Brian's presence. The second was a traveling nurse named Angela Reyes, who was working a temporary contract at Ridley General. She'd only been in town for 2 weeks when she got pulled over. Angela was from Los Angeles. She knew what real cops acted like, and this wasn't it. Both incidents were reported. Both reports went nowhere. The sheriff's office was small, understaffed, and dealing with what they considered real crimes. Meth labs in the mountains, domestic disputes, drunk drivers. A couple of weird traffic stops didn't even register on their radar. It was small-town policing at its worst. Here's what nobody noticed at the time, the pattern that connected all these stops. Marcus never issued a single citation. Not one. No speeding tickets. No written warnings. No fix-it tickets for broken taillights. In a normal traffic stop, there's always paper. Something that creates a record, something that proves the stop happened and why. But Marcus couldn't do that. He had no access to the systems, no ticket book that would hold up to scrutiny, no way to create official documentation. So every stop ended the same way: a smile, a drive safe, and nothing else. If anyone at the sheriff's office had bothered to cross-reference the reports, they would have noticed this immediately. 5 traffic stops, 0 citations. That doesn't happen. That never happens. But nobody was looking. Nobody was connecting the dots. The reports just sat in their files, gathering dust. There was another pattern too, one that only became clear later. Marcus never asked anyone to step out of their vehicle. Every cop show, every real traffic stop video, you see officers asking people to exit their cars all the time. It's standard procedure for certain situations. But Marcus kept everyone in their seats. Why? Because he knew that was the moment things could go wrong. Inside their car, people feel trapped. They're sitting down, seatbelt on, confined in a small space with the authority figure standing over them. They're compliant. They answer questions. But the moment you ask someone to step out, the dynamic changes. They're standing. They can run. They can fight. They can see that your patrol car doesn't quite look right, that your badge doesn't have the right markings, that something about this whole situation is off. Marcus understood human psychology better than anyone gave him credit for. October 19th, 2019. This is the night everything almost ended early. A woman named Diane Cutter, 34, was driving home from her job at a bar in Ridley when Marcus pulled her over. Diane was different from his other targets. She'd grown up in Garrett County, knew most of the deputies by name, and had dated a highway patrol officer for 2 years back in her 20s. When Marcus approached her window, she noticed things. The badge looked wrong. The uniform shirt was slightly the wrong shade of brown. And when she asked for his name and badge number, he hesitated. Just for a second, but she caught it. Diane's hand moved toward her phone. She told him she was going to call the sheriff's office to verify the stop, something she knew she had every right to do. And that's when Marcus made his only mistake in months of hunting. He panicked. For just a moment, the mask slipped. Diane saw something change in his eyes, something cold and calculating that made her blood freeze. But then he recovered, smiled that same empty smile, and told her that wouldn't be necessary. He said there must have been a mistake, that she was free to go, that he was sorry for the inconvenience, and then he walked back to his car and drove away. No questions about where she lived, no questions about her schedule, nothing. Diane sat there shaking, absolutely certain that something terrible had just almost happened. She reported it the next morning. The deputy who took her statement actually seemed concerned. He made some calls, checked the duty roster. No deputies had been on patrol in that area the night before. He flagged the report as suspicious. And then, somehow, it got lost in the shuffle. Misfiled. Forgotten. Diane called back twice to follow up. Both times she was told someone would get back to her. Nobody ever did. 5 reports. 5 different people. All describing the same guy, the same car, the same stretch of road, the same strange questions that had nothing to do with traffic violations, and nothing happened. The system that was supposed to protect these people failed them completely. I think about that a lot when I'm researching these cases. How many times do we all drive past monsters without knowing it? How many times does someone file a report that gets ignored, make a complaint that goes nowhere, raise an alarm that nobody hears? Marcus Weber should have been caught in August of 2019 after Patricia Vance walked into that sheriff's office. He should have been caught in October when Diane Cutter called to follow up. But he wasn't. And because nobody connected the dots, because nobody took these reports seriously, Marcus was free to keep hunting. Free to keep adding names to his notebook. Free to plan what came next. And what came next was so much worse than anyone imagined. Jennifer Ashworth moved to Garrett County in the spring of 2019, chasing the dream that brings a lot of people to places like this. She wanted quiet. She wanted space. She wanted to wake up to mountains instead of traffic noise and to actually see the stars at night. She'd spent 15 years working in marketing for a tech company in Denver, climbing the ladder, burning out, watching her 20s and half her 30s disappear into conference rooms and quarterly reports. When she finally saved enough to quit and go freelance, she sold her condo, packed everything she owned into a U-Haul, and headed west into the mountains. She found a small house outside Ridley, set up a home office, and started building a new life. For 6 months, it was everything she'd hoped for. And then, on a cold night in December, she met the man who would change everything. The first time Marcus pulled her over, Jennifer didn't think much of it. December 12, 2019, around 10:30 at night. She'd driven to Pearson to have dinner with a new friend she'd met at a yoga class, and she was heading home on the ridgeline when she saw the lights. The officer was polite enough, asked for her license and registration, made small talk about the weather, about how she liked living in the area. Then came the questions that felt slightly off. Did she live alone? How long had she been in Garrett County? Did she work from home? Jennifer answered honestly, not thinking anything of it. She was new to rural living, still adjusting to the different pace, the different culture. Maybe cops out here were just friendlier, more conversational. She told herself it was nothing and drove home without another thought. 3 weeks later, it happened again. January 2nd, 2020. Same stretch of road, same time of night, same flashing lights in her rearview mirror. When the officer approached her window, Jennifer felt a jolt of recognition. It was the same man, same face, same voice, same strange questions. This time he asked about her work schedule, whether she traveled often, whether she had any pets. Jennifer's marketing brain kicked in, the part of her that had spent years analyzing patterns and consumer behavior. Something was wrong here. The same cop pulling her over twice in 3 weeks on the same road, asking the same types of questions? That wasn't random. That wasn't coincidence. When he handed back her documents and told her to drive safe, Jennifer smiled and nodded. But inside, every alarm bell she had was ringing. She couldn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, trying to find information about Garrett County Sheriff's deputies. The department had a basic website with a Meet Our Team page featuring photos of the sheriff and a few senior staff. None of them matched the man who had pulled her over. She dug deeper, found an old newspaper article about a deputy retirement ceremony with a group photo, studied every face. Nothing. She searched for Colorado Highway Patrol officers assigned to the region. Nothing. She even found a few personal Facebook profiles of local deputies through mutual connections and community groups. None of them were him. By 3 a.m, Jennifer had looked at every publicly available photo of every law enforcement officer who could conceivably be patrolling that stretch of road. The man who had stopped her twice didn't exist. For 2 days, Jennifer debated what to do. Part of her felt ridiculous. Was she really going to accuse someone of being a fake cop based on the fact that she couldn't find his photo online? Maybe he was new. Maybe he was from a neighboring county helping out. Maybe the website just wasn't updated. But another part of her, the part that had survived 15 years in a male-dominated industry by trusting her instincts, refused to let it go. On January 4th, she made a decision. She opened Facebook and navigated to Garrett County Community Board, a local group with about 3,000 members where people posted about everything from lost dogs to restaurant recommendations. She stared at the empty text box for 10 minutes. Then she started typing. She kept it simple. She described the 2 traffic stops, the questions, the officer who didn't match any deputy she could find. She asked if anyone else had experienced something similar. Then she held her breath and clicked post. The first response came within 20 minutes. A woman named Patricia Vance commented that she'd had an almost identical experience back in August. Then came another comment from someone named Angela Rios, describing a stop in September that matched Jennifer's description exactly. Within 2 hours, the post had over 40 comments. Some were skeptical, telling Jennifer she was probably overreacting. But mixed in with the skeptics were more stories. David Chun, Brian and Michelle Torres, Diane Cutter, who wrote a long comment describing the night she'd almost called to verify the stop and watched the officer's demeanor change completely. By midnight, Jennifer had counted at least 7 people describing encounters with the same man. Same car, same questions, same stretch of road. Same officer who never wrote tickets and never gave his badge number. Jennifer read every comment with growing horror. This wasn't paranoia. This was a pattern. The post went locally viral overnight. By the next morning, it had been shared over 200 times. People who didn't even live in Garrett County were commenting, tagging friends who did, asking if they were safe. A reporter from a small news outlet in Denver reached out to Jennifer asking for an interview. And finally, inevitably, the Garrett County Sheriff's Office couldn't ignore it anymore. Jennifer received a phone call from a detective named Richard Molina who asked if she could come in to give a formal statement. His voice was serious in a way that told her everything she needed to know. They were taking this seriously now. When she arrived at the station, she saw Patricia Vance in the waiting room. Then Angela Reyes walked in. Then Diane Cutter. One by one, the women from the Facebook post gathered in that small-town sheriff's office, finally being heard, finally being believed. This is where everything changes. One woman. One Facebook post. That's all it took to expose what had been happening on those dark mountain roads for months. Jennifer Ashworth didn't have a badge or a gun or any official authority. She had a laptop, an internet connection, and the refusal to ignore what her gut was telling her. And guys, I need you to understand something. What she uncovered with that single post was just the beginning. The Facebook comments, the shared stories, the pattern that emerged, that was only the surface. Because once the police finally started investigating, once they finally started taking this seriously, they discovered that Marcus Weber wasn't just pulling people over and asking strange questions. What they found went so much deeper, so much darker. I wasn't ready when I first read the case files. You won't be either. Detective Richard Molina had been with the Garrett County Sheriff's Office for 18 years. He'd worked everything from cattle theft to meth busts to the occasional domestic homicide that comes with any rural community. He thought he'd seen it all. But sitting in that interview room on January 6, 2020, listening to Jennifer Ashworth describe her encounters, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, dread. Not because of what she was telling him, but because of what he was realizing. As Jennifer spoke, Molina pulled up the department's complaint database on his laptop. He typed in keywords: traffic stop, unusual questions, unknown officer. The results made his stomach turn. There they were. 5 complaints from the past 6 months, all describing the same thing, all marked as low priority, all completely ignored. He'd been a cop long enough to know what this meant. They had a predator operating in their county, and they'd let him hunt for months. The next 48 hours were chaos. Molina pulled every complaint from the database and called each person who had filed one. Most of them were shocked to hear from law enforcement at all. Patricia Vance actually laughed when Molina introduced himself, a bitter sound that carried 6 months of frustration. "You're finally calling me back," she said. "Took you long enough." One by one, Molina interviewed them all, building a timeline that made the pattern undeniable. The stops had started in late July and continued through early January. All occurred between 9 p.m. and midnight. All happened on rural routes within a 15-mile radius. All targeted drivers who were alone. And all featured the same questions, the same probing into personal details that had nothing to do with traffic enforcement. Molina presented his findings to Sheriff Howard Beck the next morning. By noon, they had opened a formal investigation. Meanwhile, Jennifer's Facebook post had taken on a life of its own. What started as a question to 3,000 local residents had spread far beyond Garrett County. Denver news stations picked up the story. Online true crime communities started discussing it. The post itself had accumulated over 500 comments, and Jennifer found herself spending hours each day responding to messages, coordinating with other victims, trying to keep track of every new piece of information that emerged. She created a private Facebook group for people who had been stopped by the mystery officer, a space where they could share details without the noise of the public comments. Within a week, that group had 23 members. 23 people who had encountered Marcus Weber on those dark mountain roads. 23 people who had answered his questions without knowing what he was really asking. The victims started comparing notes, and that's when the details got disturbing. Sarah Mellinger, the nurse who had been stopped in November, realized that her house had been broken into 2 weeks after her traffic stop. Nothing valuable was taken, just some small items she hadn't even noticed were missing until she really looked. A spare key she kept in a kitchen drawer, a photo from her refrigerator, her work schedule, which she'd printed out and pinned to a corkboard in her home office. At the time, she'd assumed she'd misplaced these things. Now she wasn't so sure. Another victim, a woman named Christine Park, who hadn't even known about the Facebook post until a friend tagged her, reported something similar. 3 weeks after her stop, she came home to find her back door unlocked. She lived alone and was certain she'd locked it. She'd convinced herself she was being forgetful. Now, sitting in that private Facebook group, reading story after story, Christine felt sick. A local journalist named Marcus Webb, and yes, the similarity in names to the perpetrator is pure coincidence that confused everyone during the investigation, had been following the story since Jennifer's original post. Webb worked for the Ridley Register, a small weekly newspaper that mostly covered county commission meetings and high school sports. But he recognized a real story when he saw one. He started his own investigation, filing public records requests for all traffic-related complaints in Garrett County over the past year. He interviewed victims who were willing to talk on the record. He drove the Ridgeline at night, photographing the turnouts where stops had occurred, documenting how isolated and dark they really were. His first article ran on January 12th, a week after Jennifer's post. The headline read, "Mystery Officer Terrorizes Rural Motorists. Sheriff's Office Ignored Months of Warnings." It was picked up by 3 Denver television stations within hours. The pressure on Sheriff Beck became immense. County commissioners called emergency meetings. The mayor of Ridley demanded answers. Residents flooded the sheriff's office with calls, asking what was being done, demanding to know if they were safe. Beck held a press conference on January 14th, his first public statement on the case. He acknowledged that complaints had been mishandled. He promised a full internal review, and he announced that the department was working with state police to identify and apprehend the suspect. What he didn't mention was that they had almost nothing to go on. The victims' descriptions of the suspect were consistent but generic. White male, mid-30s, medium build, brown hair. That described half the men in Colorado. The car was a dark-colored Crown Victoria, but nobody had gotten a clear look at the plates. They needed a break. They needed something concrete. And they were about to get it. The break came from an unlikely source. A man named Gerald Thornton, 71 years old, retired engineer, paranoid about everything. Gerald had installed a dash cam in his truck 3 years earlier after a minor fender bender dispute. He recorded every drive he ever took, backing up the footage to an external hard drive in his garage. Gerald himself had never been pulled over by the fake officer. But on the night of December 12th, the same night Jennifer Ashworth had her first encounter, Gerald had been driving the Ridgeline about 20 minutes behind her. His dash cam had captured a dark Crown Victoria with flashing lights pulling out from a gravel turnout and heading in the opposite direction. The footage was grainy, shot through a dirty windshield at night. But when investigators enhanced it, they could make out 4 characters of the license plate. 4 characters was enough. They ran every possible combination through the DMV database, filtering for Crown Victorias registered in Colorado. 3 days later, they had a name, Marcus Allen Weber, and an address just 15 miles outside of Ridley. You know what's crazy? The police had all these reports for months. 5 complaints sitting in a database, describing the exact same suspect, the exact same methods, filed by people who had no connection to each other. Any one of those complaints, if someone had actually investigated it, could have ended this in August, in September, in October. But nobody looked. Nobody connected the dots. It took Jennifer Ashworth's Facebook post to do what the entire sheriff's department couldn't or wouldn't do. It took a woman with no law enforcement training, no investigative resources, nothing but a laptop and a gut feeling to expose a predator who had been hunting in plain sight. Let that sink in. The system designed to protect these people failed completely. And the only reason Marcus Weber was finally on their radar was because a Facebook group did the job the police were supposed to do. I don't know about you, but that keeps me up at night. January 19th, 2020. Detective Molina sat at his desk staring at a DMV printout that had just changed everything. Marcus Allen Weber. Date of birth, March 15th, 1985. Address, 4417 Timber Creek Road, Ridley, Colorado. Vehicle registered, 2008 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor, dark blue, plates matching the partial from Gerald Thornton's dash cam. Molina had run the name through every database he had access to. No felony record, no outstanding warrants, not even a speeding ticket in the past 5 years. On paper, Marcus Weber was nobody. A ghost living in a rented cabin in the mountains, paying his bills on time, bothering no one. But Molina had been a cop long enough to know that the most dangerous people are often the ones who look completely ordinary. He picked up his phone and called the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. It was time to dig deeper. The CBI background check revealed what the standard databases couldn't. Marcus Weber had worked as a licensed security guard in Denver from 2015 to 2018. His employment had ended abruptly, flagged in the system as a termination for cause. Molina made some calls to the security company, spoke to a human resources manager who remembered the case clearly. She told him about the cleaning crew employee Marcus had detained, about the 2 hours of interrogation in a back room, about the notebook they'd found in his locker filled with names and personal details of building employees. She told him that their lawyers had advised against pressing charges because they didn't want the publicity, a decision she said she'd regretted ever since. When Molina asked if she could send him copies of the incident reports, she said she'd have them in his inbox within the hour. He hung up the phone feeling like he just looked into a window of what Marcus Weber really was. The incident reports painted a picture that made Molina's skin crawl. The cleaning crew employee, a man named Eduardo Vega, had described his detention in vivid detail. Marcus had asked him dozens of questions that had nothing to do with building security. Where did he live? Who did he live with? What time did he leave for work? What time did he get home? Did anyone know he was working tonight? Eduardo had been terrified, convinced that something terrible was about to happen, that this man in a uniform was going to hurt him and nobody would ever know. When Molina read those words, he thought about Sarah Mellinger, about Jennifer Ashworth, about all the people on that Facebook group describing the same questions, the same feeling of dread. Marcus had been practicing for years. The security job wasn't a career. It was a training ground. He'd been learning how to isolate people, how to question them, how to make them feel powerless. And when he got caught, he didn't stop. He just found a new hunting ground. Sheriff Beck called an emergency meeting with the CBI and Colorado State Patrol on January 21st. The conference room at the Garrett County Sheriff's Office had never been so crowded. Molina presented everything they had: the victim statements, the timeline, the background on Marcus Weber, the dashcam footage, the security company incident. By the end of his presentation, everyone in the room understood what they were dealing with. This wasn't some prankster playing cop for thrills. This was a methodical predator who had spent years perfecting his technique. The question now was what to do about it. They could arrest him immediately on charges of impersonating a police officer. They had enough for that. But something in Molina's gut told him there was more. The questions Marcus asked his victims, the obsessive detail, the notebook full of names at his old job. He wasn't just stopping people for the power trip. He was collecting information, planning something. And if they arrested him too soon, they might never find out what. The decision was made to conduct surveillance before moving in. They needed to understand the full scope of what Marcus was doing. State Patrol provided an unmarked vehicle and 2 plainclothes officers. The CBI contributed a surveillance specialist with experience in long-term operations. Molina insisted on being part of the team himself. On January 22nd, they set up their first observation post on a Forest Service road about half a mile from Marcus Weber's cabin. The cabin itself was small, isolated, surrounded by pine trees that blocked the view from every angle except one narrow gap. Through that gap, using high-powered binoculars, they could see the driveway where the Crown Victoria was parked. They settled in and waited. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. Marcus's car never moved. They started to wonder if he'd somehow been tipped off, if he knew they were watching. Then, on the 3rd night, everything changed. January 25th, 7:43 p.m., the cabin's porch light flickered on. Through their binoculars, the surveillance team watched Marcus Weber emerge from his front door wearing what appeared to be a sheriff's deputy uniform. He walked to the Crown Victoria with the casual confidence of a man going to work. He climbed inside, started the engine, and let it idle for several minutes. Then he backed out of the driveway and headed toward town. The team followed at a distance, no headlights, relying on the faint glow of Marcus's taillights to guide them. They tracked him to the ridgeline, where he pulled into one of the gravel turnouts and killed his lights. And then he waited. For 2 hours, Marcus Weber sat in that turnout in the dark, watching every car that passed, waiting for the right target. That night, nobody fit his criteria. At 11:30, he drove home. The team watched him go inside and turn off his lights. But now they knew. He was still hunting. They watched him for 6 days. 6 nights of Marcus leaving his cabin after dark, driving those mountain roads, parking in turnouts, waiting. On the 4th night, they observed him pull over an actual vehicle, a pickup truck driven by a man in his 60s. The team had to make an impossible decision in real time. Did they intervene and blow the surveillance, or did they let it play out and risk someone getting hurt? They chose to watch, ready to move if anything escalated. Marcus approached the truck, spoke to the driver for about 5 minutes, then returned to his car and drove away. The driver continued home, unaware that a dozen law enforcement officers had just watched his encounter through night vision scopes. Later, they would interview that man. He described the same strange questions everyone else had experienced. Do you live alone? Does anyone know where you are tonight? The team had what they needed, but Molina pushed for one more day. He wanted to understand the full pattern. He wanted to know what Marcus was building toward. They watched him for 6 days. 6 days of Marcus leaving his house after dark, driving those mountain roads, looking for someone to pull over. And every night, the investigators had to make a choice. Do we stop him now, or do we wait to see how deep this goes? That question haunted Molina. Every time Marcus pulled someone over, there was a chance something could go wrong, a chance that their surveillance operation could become a crime scene. But Molina had seen the notebook from the security company. He'd read about Marcus cataloging people, collecting information, building towards something. If they arrested him for impersonating an officer, he'd get a few years at most. But if they could prove what he was really planning, they could put him away forever. So they waited. They watched. They documented everything. And on January 28th, they finally got their warrant. What they found inside that cabin would justify every difficult decision they'd made. And it would give them nightmares for years to come. January 29th, 2020. The night they'd been waiting for. Marcus Weber left his cabin at 8:15 p.m., right on schedule. The surveillance team followed him to the ridgeline, watched him settle into his usual turnout, watched him wait in the darkness like a spider in a web. At 9:47, a silver Honda Accord passed his position, driven by a woman traveling alone. Marcus pulled out behind her. The team tracked him from a distance, their hearts pounding, their radios silent. A quarter-mile down the road, the flashing lights came on. The Honda pulled over. Marcus stepped out of his Crown Victoria and began walking toward the driver's window. That's when 4 unmarked vehicles converged from every direction, sirens screaming, headlights blazing. Marcus froze in the middle of the road, caught in the crossfire of a dozen high beams, his fake badge glinting in the light. Detective Molina was the first one out of his vehicle, weapon drawn, shouting commands. Marcus didn't run. He didn't resist. He just stood there with that empty smile on his face, like he'd been expecting this all along. The arrest itself was almost anticlimactic. Marcus went to his knees without being told. He put his hands behind his head like he'd practiced the motion 1,000 times. When Molina cuffed him and read him his rights, Marcus responded with a single sentence that nobody on the team would ever forget. "You're too late," he said. Just that, nothing else. He refused to speak another word during the entire booking process. The woman in the Honda, a 32-year-old accountant named Rebecca Torres, who had no idea she'd just been saved from something terrible, was interviewed at the scene. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup of coffee a deputy gave her. "He asked me if I lived alone," she said. "He asked me if anyone was expecting me tonight." The same questions. The same script. Marcus had been minutes away from adding another name to whatever he was building, but now he was in handcuffs. And the real investigation was about to begin. The search warrant for Marcus Weber's cabin was signed by a judge at 6 a.m. on January 30th. By 7, a team of 12 law enforcement officers had descended on the property. Molina was there along with CBI forensic specialists, State Patrol investigators, and a crime scene photographer who would later say this was the worst scene he'd processed in 20 years. The cabin itself was unremarkable from the outside. Small, weathered, the kind of rental property that dots the mountains throughout Colorado. A single bedroom, a bathroom, a combined kitchen and living area, a detached garage. The team started with the garage, expecting to find the equipment Marcus used for his traffic stops. They found that and so much more. The Crown Victoria was parked inside, still warm from the previous night. Beside it, laid out on a workbench with almost surgical precision, was everything Marcus needed to become a police officer. The light bar, the spotlight, the uniform freshly pressed, the duty belt with handcuffs and flashlight, the badge, which turned out to be a remarkably accurate replica he'd ordered from a prop company in California. But that was just the beginning. The first truly disturbing discovery came in a filing cabinet pushed against the garage wall. Inside were manila folders, dozens of them, each one labeled with a date. Molina pulled the first folder and opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a Colorado driver's license belonging to a woman named Sarah Mellinger. Beneath it were handwritten notes. "Lives alone. Works night shifts at Ridley General. Usually gets off around 11 p.m. No security system visible. Spare key possibly in planter by front door. Dog? No sign of one." The notes went on for 2 pages, documenting everything Marcus had learned during that traffic stop and everything he'd discovered since. There were 34 folders in that cabinet. 34 people who had been stopped by Marcus Weber over the past 7 months. 34 files filled with personal information that no stranger should ever have. Some of the folders were thin, just a license copy and basic notes. Others were thick with additional materials that made the investigators' blood run cold. The photographs were the worst part. Mixed in with the documents were pictures, dozens of them, printed on standard photo paper. Some were clearly taken during traffic stops, shot through car windows while victims handed over their licenses, their faces illuminated by flashlight. But others were different. Photos of houses taken from the street, photos of mailboxes with visible addresses, photos of cars parked in driveways. And then, in about a dozen folders, Photos that could only have been taken from inside the victims' homes. A kitchen counter with mail spread across it. A bedroom with an unmade bed. A bathroom mirror reflecting a medicine cabinet. A home office with a work schedule pinned to a corkboard. The investigators stared at these images in silence, the implications settling over them like a physical weight. Marcus hadn't just been stopping people and asking questions. He'd been following up. He'd been entering their homes while they were at work, while they slept, while they had no idea that a predator had already crossed the threshold. He'd been studying them, learning their routines, taking souvenirs. In the bedroom of the cabin, they found what investigators would later call the selection notebook. It was a black composition book, the kind you'd buy at any office supply store, filled with Marcus's cramped handwriting. The first few pages contained what appeared to be criteria. Lives alone, mandatory. Predictable schedule, preferred. Rural address, preferred. No dog, mandatory. No security cameras, mandatory. The pages that followed were a ranking system. Names from the folders scored on a scale of 1 to 10 across multiple categories. Sarah Mellinger had a 7. Jennifer Ashworth had scored 9. Each entry included notes on why points had been added or deducted. SM point deducted, unpredictable shift patterns. Ya point added, confirmed no regular visitors, house very isolated. Reading that notebook, Melina realized they weren't just looking at a collection of potential burglary targets. They were looking at a hunting log. Marcus had been evaluating his victims for months, narrowing down his list, searching for the perfect target. And the scores made it clear he'd found several. The final discoveries came from a locked trunk at the foot of Marcus's bed. The lock was cheap, easily cut with bolt cutters. Inside, arranged with disturbing neatness, was a collection of items that revealed exactly where this had been heading. 50 feet of nylon rope, still in its packaging. 2 rolls of heavy-duty duct tape. A pack of industrial zip ties. A set of master keys designed to open common residential locks. A stun gun, fully charged. Latex gloves, an unopened box of 50. And at the very bottom, a hand-drawn map of Garrett County with 4 addresses circled in red marker. 4 homes belonging to the 4 highest-scoring names in the selection notebook. Investigators would later confirm that Marcus had already entered 3 of those 4 homes at least once while the occupants were away. He'd been inside their bedrooms, their bathrooms. He'd touched their belongings. He'd stood in their kitchens and looked through their mail, and they had never known. They'd gone to sleep in those houses, locked their doors, felt safe. And the whole time, a predator had already marked them as his. I want you to pause and think about this. Every person Marcus Weber stopped on those dark mountain roads, he wasn't just playing cop. He wasn't just getting a power trip from the uniform and the flashing lights. He was conducting interviews. Job interviews, in a way, except the job was being his victim. Every question he asked had a purpose. Every answer went into his files. Do you live alone? That told him if anyone would notice if something went wrong. What time do you get off work? That told him when your house would be empty. Do you have a security system? That told him if he could get inside without being detected. And some of these people, the ones with the thick folders, the ones with photos of their bedrooms and their kitchens, he had already been inside their homes. He'd walked through their hallways. He'd touched their things. They just didn't know it yet. Sarah Mellinger's spare key hadn't been misplaced. Her work schedule hadn't gone missing on its own. Marcus had taken them. He'd been inside her house while she slept at night, while she worked her shifts at the hospital, while she lived her life completely unaware that she'd already been chosen. That's what they found in that cabin. Not just evidence of a crime, but evidence of a nightmare that was days away from becoming real. The map they found in Marcus Weber's trunk haunted Detective Molina for months afterward. It was a standard road map of Garrett County, the kind you could pick up at any gas station, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn soft. But Marcus had transformed it into something else entirely. He'd marked it with handwritten annotations, routes traced in different colored highlighters, times written in the margins. And in the center of the map, 4 addresses had been circled in thick red marker. Not just circled, labeled. Above each red circle, in Marcus's cramped handwriting, was a single word that made the investigators' blood freeze. Phase 2. 2 words that transformed everything they thought they understood about this case. Marcus Weber hadn't been building toward burglaries. He hadn't been collecting information for identity theft or simple home invasions. Phase 2 meant escalation. Phase 2 meant he was ready to stop watching and start taking. Those 4 addresses represented 4 women he'd selected through months of careful evaluation. 4 women who were about to disappear. The forensic psychologist who reviewed the case files would later testify that Marcus Weber displayed classic, predatory behavior patterns that indicated an organized offender preparing for violent crimes. The selection notebook, the scoring system, the surveillance, the home invasions, all of it pointed toward someone methodically working toward a specific goal. The equipment in his trunk confirmed it. You don't buy 50 feet of rope and a stun gun because you're planning to steal televisions. You buy those things because you're planning to take people. Investigators cross-referenced the 4 Phase 2 addresses with the files in Marcus's cabinet and found the 4 highest-scoring victims in his ranking system. Each one lived alone. Each one had predictable schedules. Each one had already been entered at least once without their knowledge. Each one had been photographed inside their own homes. Marcus knew their routines better than they knew themselves. He knew when they slept, when they showered, when they were most vulnerable. He'd been preparing for months, and he was days away from making his move. The 3rd name on the Phase 2 list stopped Melina cold. Jennifer Ashworth. The woman whose Facebook post had started the entire investigation. The woman who had noticed the pattern, who had trusted her instincts, who had refused to stay silent when everyone told her she was overreacting. She was going to be one of his victims. When Melina reviewed her file from Marcus's cabinet, he found the most detailed notes of any victim. Marcus had been watching her for weeks. He knew she worked from home most days, that she went to yoga on Tuesday evenings, that she grocery shopped on Saturday mornings, that she sometimes went days without seeing another person. Her isolation score was the highest in the notebook. Her file contained 14 photographs taken inside her house. Images of her bedroom, her bathroom, her home office where she worked alone for hours at a time. Marcus had even noted which window had a faulty lock, which door she sometimes forgot to deadbolt, which nights she fell asleep on the couch watching television. He had been inside her house at least 3 times, and she had never known. The task of informing the Phase 2 victims fell to Melina personally. He insisted on it. These women deserved to hear what had almost happened to them from someone who understood the full weight of it, not from a press release or a news report. Jennifer Ashworth was the hardest conversation he'd ever had in 18 years of law enforcement. He sat in her living room, the same living room Marcus had photographed, and watched her face as he explained what they'd found. The files, the photographs, the selection notebook, the map with her address circled in red. Jennifer didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there in absolute silence, her hands gripping the arms of her chair until her knuckles went white. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He was in my house," she said. "He was in my house while I slept." Melina nodded. "Yes, he was." Jennifer looked around her living room like she was seeing it for the first time. Like every corner now held a shadow that hadn't been there before. Marcus Weber was charged with 37 counts across multiple jurisdictions. Impersonating a peace officer, 34 counts of stalking, 12 counts of burglary, 4 counts of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The prosecution painted a picture of a meticulous predator who had spent years developing his methods. First at the security company in Denver, then in the mountains of Garrett County. They presented the notebooks, the photographs, the equipment, the map. They called victim after victim to the stand, each one describing the traffic stops, the questions, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The defense tried to argue that Marcus was merely a troubled man with authority fantasies, that there was no proof he intended to actually harm anyone. The jury didn't buy it. Nobody who saw the contents of that cabin could believe Marcus Weber was harmless. After 6 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all 37 counts. The judge sentenced him to 43 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 30. The aftermath of the case rippled through Garrett County for years. The sheriff's office underwent a complete overhaul of their complaint handling procedures. Deputies received new training on identifying patterns across seemingly unrelated reports. A victim advocacy group was established, funded partly by a civil settlement the county paid to avoid a lawsuit from the victims whose complaints had been ignored. But for the people whose names appeared in those manila folders, no policy change could undo what Marcus had done to their sense of safety. Sarah Mellinger moved out of state 6 months after the trial. She couldn't sleep in a house she knew Marcus had entered. Christine Park installed a security system with 16 cameras and still checks every lock 3 times before bed. Several victims reported symptoms of severe PTSD, nightmares about waking up to find a man standing in their bedroom, panic attacks triggered by the sight of police lights. Some of them may never feel safe in their own homes again. That's the part of these stories that doesn't make the headlines. The wounds that never fully heal. Jennifer Ashworth still lives in Garrett County. She testified at Marcus Weber's trial, looked him in the eyes, and described how he had stolen something from her that she can never get back. The sense of sanctuary in her own home. The ability to trust that locked doors mean safety. The peace of sleeping through the night without wondering what sounds might wake her. In interviews after the trial, she said she refused to let him drive her away from the life she'd built. She changed her locks, installed cameras, adopted a German shepherd named Diesel who sleeps at the foot of her bed. But she admits there are nights when she still lies awake, staring at her bedroom door, unable to shake the knowledge that he was once standing on the other side. She became an advocate for victims of stalking, speaking at conferences, pushing for legislation that would require better tracking of complaints that might indicate serial offenders. She turned her trauma into purpose, but she'll never forget how close she came to becoming a headline instead of a survivor. Marcus Weber was arrested 72 hours before his planned Phase 2. 72 hours. 3 days. That's all that separated 4 women from something I can't even describe on this channel. Jennifer Ashworth's name was on that list. The woman who exposed him, the woman whose Facebook post started the investigation that brought him down, was going to be his first real victim. If she hadn't posted that day, if she talked herself out of it, if she'd decided she was being paranoid like so many other victims had, Marcus Weber would have taken her. We know this because his notebook spelled it out. Jennifer, a first acquisition. Date TBD. He was waiting for the right moment. And that moment was coming. She saved herself by refusing to stay quiet. She saved 3 other women too. Women who never even knew they were in danger until Melina knocked on their doors. If she hadn't posted that day, I don't want to finish that sentence, and neither do you. Marcus Weber is currently incarcerated at the Colorado Territorial Correctional Facility in Kagan City. He will be eligible for parole in 2053. He'll be 68 years old. Jennifer Ashworth will be 68 too, and should be waiting to make sure he never gets out. So that's the story of Marcus Weber, the fake cop who hunted on the dark roads of Garrett County, the predator who hid behind a badge and a smile, and the woman who stopped him with nothing but a Facebook post and the refusal to ignore what her gut was telling her. I've covered a lot of cases on this channel. Stories that kept me up at night, stories that made me look over my shoulder, stories that reminded me just how thin the line is between safety and danger. But this one hit different, because Marcus Weber wasn't some criminal mastermind. He wasn't a genius. He was just a guy who understood one simple truth about human nature. We trust uniforms. We obey authority. We answer questions we shouldn't answer because someone with a badge is asking. And he exploited that trust for months while the people who were supposed to protect us filed. Complaints in folders marked low priority. This is why I do this channel. These stories need to be told. Not for entertainment, not for shock value, but because somewhere out there right now, someone is sitting in their car on a dark road, being asked questions that don't feel right, and they need to know it's okay to trust that feeling. They need to know that they can ask for a badge number. They can call to verify a traffic stop. They can refuse to answer questions that have nothing to do with why they were pulled over. Jennifer Ashworth trusted her instincts, and it saved her life. It saved 3 other lives too. That's not paranoia. That's survival. And if telling these stories helps even one person recognize when something is wrong, then every hour I spend researching, every sleepless night putting these scripts together, it's worth it. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a traffic stop that felt wrong? A moment where something just didn't sit right, where the question seemed too personal, where the officer's behavior made your skin crawl. I read every single comment on this channel, and I know some of you have stories that need to be heard. Maybe your story will help someone else recognize a dangerous situation before it's too late. And while you're down there, if this video meant something to you, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to show this to more people, and these are the kinds of stories that need to reach as many people as possible. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Click that button, turn on notifications, and you'll be the first to know when new investigations drop. Speaking of which, next week we're going somewhere I've never taken you before. A small town in the Midwest, a doctor that everyone trusted, and a pattern of deaths that took 15 years to uncover. I've been researching this case for months, and I'm finally ready to tell it. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one. Make sure you're subscribed so it shows up in your feed the moment it goes live. Until then, stay safe out there. Lock your doors, trust your instincts. And remember, not everyone wearing a badge deserves to. I'll see you in the next one.